This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a gaggle of developers with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 299, Sustainability of the Webform Module. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we chat with our friend Jacob Rockowitz about sustainability of the Webform module and module maintainership sustainability. How many times can we put that word in the intro? Hey, I'm Stephen Cross, and joining me today, along with my usual guest, is Jacob Rockowitz. Jacob has built and maintains the Webform module in Drupal 8 and 9. He's a Drupal community leader, advocate of open source, visionary for open source sustainability, which we're going to hear about today. He was proudly born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He lives today there with his wife, 2 children, and dog, Ozzy. This is his 5th appearance on Talking Drupal. And since we've been preparing for episode 300, we've been looking at statistics. He's been on 1.6% of our shows. So welcome, Jacob.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to do a 5th show. I feel like we've been leading up to this show in our little conversations about Webform or on the side. It comes up. We could get to why this is so important.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here and talk about it. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And joining, as usual, is John Picozzi from
EPAM Systems. I know, everybody. I got a new job. I am going back to the tech side of things. I am now a solutions architect at EPAM. And in my first week, drinking from the fire hose of information. And there will be, I'm sure, updates as I learn and do more. But just kind of settling into a new way of doing things.
It's going to be difficult for you not to say oomph during this show, isn't it?
The hardest part is writing my email address, because after the @ you just naturally want to write oomphinc.com, but that's not that doesn't work anymore. So that's probably going to be a little hurdle to overcome. Luckily, through the magic of editing, anytime I say the wrong thing, Nick can just change it to the right thing.
Congratulations, John. Happy for you.
Yeah, congrats.
Thanks.
So coming back to us, his second week as a guest host is Jason Palmental. Jason, what is new with you this week?
Oh, not too much. Today was a pretty fun day. I actually started with chat with some folks at a website that sells a lot of pet products, talking to them about something that they want to work on. So that was pretty cool. And then had a chat with the design team from Automatic. So I'm kind of rounding out my whole open source thing. Jeffrey Zeldman invited me to chat with them and talk about variable fonts and web typography in WordPress. And now back over to Drupal.
You want to tell us who that pet company is?
Well, I don't think it's really that big a secret. But
I love Chewy. I don't know if it's Chewy, but that is an awesome website.
They're a great bunch of people. I know a bunch of folks there that some of whom I've worked with since, almost over 20 years.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. And a lot of it's all type related, but thinking about how, what's the experience in customizing stuff for your pet. And a lot of that has to do with type and how you might show that on the web. So that was really cool. It was really fun. I hope someday to see that stuff come to life. And the same thing is true, talking with the folks at Automatic, working with people in open source platforms that drive so much of the web between Drupal and WordPress. If you can influence the people who make that core thing, then that gets multiplied, millions of times when everybody uses that stuff when they build a website. So it's pretty exciting, to get a chance to share some of these ideas. A lot of the stuff that I showed on the Rhode Island platform, same kind of thing.
Well, thanks for joining us again. We appreciate you being here for 2 more weeks as well. And Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Development. What's up with you, Nick?
Not too much this week. I went to the drive-in last weekend and saw a couple of movies. I saw In the Heights, which is I think it's a Broadway musical adapted to a movie. and it was kind of interesting. I don't usually go for those types of movies, but I really, really enjoyed it. I also recognized some of the background dancers. They've been to some of the salsa lessons and things that I used to take with my wife. So I was like, what? And I followed them on Instagram and I saw them. I'm like, wait a minute, I know those people.
That's awesome.
And so that was kind of cool.
It's also on HBO Max right now too, by the way.
Yeah, we just watched it last night. So. It was really a lot of fun.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna watch it this weekend.
I felt like it was a little bit long for driving. Like, I feel like 2-hour movies are just a tad bit long.
That's why you go get chips. Drive-ins can't be too long. You can just like space off, go to the restroom.
More snacks.
Yeah, you just walk to the back and get more snacks.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
I was reading the show notes and it said drive-in, and I thought you had like adopted a drive. Like you leave your house, you get in the car, you drive around the block, and then you come back home and start working or something like that.
Nope.
Oh, he's projecting it on the garage. He just sits in the driveway.
My neighbor's garage, because I don't have one.
There you go.
It's even better. They come home and just see me in the driveway, like, I'll be done in a few minutes. But no, it was a good movie. I also then we watched Conjuring 3 and discovered that as much as I like horror movies, again, driving is not the best medium for a horror movie.
I was gonna ask you if you saw that. I saw it. I loved it.
Oh, I love the movie.
It's a good movie. Yeah.
But not for the drive-in. I don't think. Big fan of the series though. But that's about it. Just first time back in the drive-in this season, and looking forward to the summer.
So Jacob, what's new with you this week?
Oh, let's see. I don't. I mean, my short story is like I used to go for long bike rides in the city. It was like my COVID thing, riding through Manhattan at 5 a.m. And I did it so much that I messed up my knee. But the good part is messed up my knee where it's just take a break and I'll recover. But what's really nice is instead of going for these early bike rides, I live in Brooklyn, go to Prospect Park at like 5:45 in the morning, got with the dog, Ozzy, and we get to roam. And we got to see there was a lunar eclipse that, frankly, I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. Because what happened was it was like there was a helicopter flying up above. I think they got to see it. And then there's clouds came in. All these people were sitting in the park waiting, and the clouds just covered it up. But we got to go for this great walk. And I mean, there was a nice surreal light for a second there. And yeah, just enjoying the city. New York is like kind of, I almost feel like we're in the middle of the mayoral election. It's like everyone's like, come back to New York City because we need it. We need people to show up.
I actually saw an I Love New York ad on TV the other day, and I was like, wow, all right, getting back to traveling, getting back to the city. I'm like, interesting.
Yeah, we're going back to see my wife's parents in a couple weekends. We haven't seen them in person in like a year and a half.
Yeah, it's changed.
Well.
I mean, it's changed a little bit because it's just, COVID's no joke for a city. Shuts down a lot of businesses. In Manhattan, a lot of businesses are closed, like a 25% vacancy on most blocks, and that would be out of the city. It's out of the Manhattan. It's okay. It's where they were like, Midtown. There's only 20% of the people are going there. Therefore, the businesses can't sustain those rents.
Yeah. Makes sense. It's tough.
I grew up in the 80s, so this feels okay. People are concerned about crime. I'm like, it's better than what I remember.
Right.
Yeah. So
for me this week, I had a customer I'd worked with for years. I haven't done anything for a few years. Reach out to me, need me to look at a few things, and I am always reminded of how awesome Ansible is and why I love to use it. I don't know if you guys use it, but I was able to easily pull down my Ansible scripts from my GitHub repository and copy this guy's databases down. Didn't have to remember anything. And just run the scripts that I run to move databases here and there, set up sites. And it's just a great utility. So I think I've talked about Ansible and the benefits of it in the past. If you're not using it, it's a great just little toolkit to have in your back pocket.
Actually, know people that use Ansible to like reload their machines if they have to go from like machine to machine, or they have an issue. They just pull down a script to run it, and it just installs everything for them.
Yeah, Benji Fisher used it a lot.
Yeah, I have a script that doesn't like install everything on a machine, but it does all my key configuration stuff. So if I fire up a new Linux machine, I'll basically get all my key configurations and utilities in with that. So it's just it's a great utility.
It's funny when Jacob was telling his story and he said, something was using 32 gigs. I automatically thought in my head, Stephen and Nick are going to go, well, guess you're not using Linux.
Yeah. Well, I asked that question when I brought it up. They're like, well, it's Windows, 32 gigs. It's enterprise. I'm like, no, that doesn't mean it's better that you're using 32 gigs. It means there's something kind of off with that architecture. But anyway.
Yeah.
So we are recording episode 300 on June 22nd, which is actually next week, depending on when you're listening to this. You can record a brief 1 minute or less audio congratulations or share a Talking Drupal experience, and we may play it in that show. If you'd like to add or send us your audio recording, you can email that to show@talkingdrupal.com.
So can I give you a 30-second congratulations? Because I have the opportunity. It's amazing what you guys have accomplished. I mean, also just the rhythm that you set up in COVID where you haven't missed a beat. It's incredible the amount of content you're producing on a weekly basis. And 300 is a huge number. Just congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting. We actually never spaced out our visuals 6 feet apart. I wonder if that's an issue. We'll have
I can't get my monitors that far apart.
Yeah.
All right. So
although I could just put John outside. That'd be all right. Right?
All right. Check that off the box. The John dig is in. All right. So let's roll up our sleeves and get into some sustainability. So I don't want to start this episode off with assuming that everyone listening knows what the Webform module is. So why don't we at least, Jacob, give us the elevator pitch for what is Webform?
So I just did a little recording, and it's like two simple things I kind of come up with when I'm describing it. It's a form builder and submission manager for Drupal. That's the very simple one-off description of it. You can build a form and collect data. But getting more specific to where it fits into the Drupal community is it provides, I like saying this, the Webform module provides all the features expected from a proprietary form builder and submission manager, combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. And that flexibility and openness is the key thing that I value about it, where there's lots of, it's built with, it's very extensible, customizable, flexible, and people are adding, it's open source, so people can do whatever they want with it. They can help contribute to it. They can build their own add-ons. And that's one of the biggest pride points I have is we've got like over close to 200 add-ons that do little integrations. And sometimes, frankly, in Drupal, if it doesn't meet your needs, you can copy the code and customize it to meet your needs. That's the short pitch.
You have the advantage in your module of the title being a description of exactly what it is. It's a web form, right? But you did describe it also as a submission manager. Could you describe what that is, submission manager?
It's good you bring that up, because the reason the submission manager it's different than what's going on in Drupal. Drupal, you can build forms to build content and collect data. And that, in many cases, can address certain requirements. There's a contact module in core, and you can create a simple contact form, and you can get a lot of functionality. The Webform module really focuses heavily on collecting a lot of data, submissions, and managing that data and creating a whole user experience around that. And it kind of goes very focused on that and competing with things like SurveyMonkey, like tools that are specific about forms and collecting data. And that's where the submission manager comes in. And when we say submission manager, it means you can see the data, you can manipulate it, you can view it, you can edit it, you can email it, you can post it. There's a lot of work. Basically, it's two parts of the Webform module. You build a form, and then you manage the submissions. And there's a ton of back-end functionality with that. And it all works together. I want to emphasize that part I've been pretty proud of with the back-end, is you can do anything you want with that data once you get it.
So before we move on to the sustainability, just for our listeners, when did you start maintaining the Webform module, and what did you kind of expect what it became when you kind of took it over?
Yeah, I should have looked at the date. It goes back like 5 or 6 years. And I've talked about it over time, but I did a module called YAML form. So I work with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and they adopted Drupal 8 very early, and Webforms wasn't ready. So I came up with a solution called YAML forms, which you still see the remnants of in the Webform UI. It's basically building forms with YAML. And there's some date. It's about 5 or 6 years ago, and I actually released the code. Oh yeah, December 25th, 2015. So we're talking 6 years ago. And it was like my Christmas. I had worked on it, and I was like, Christmas Day, I'm going to post this code on Drupal.org.
Okay.
And over the last 5 years, there's been little incremental changes over the, first year I stayed in YAML form. Then in 2016, we moved it over to Webform, and it became the next version of Webform for Drupal 8. And as that evolved, we've moved ahead. And frankly, the last big milestone was getting Webform ready for Drupal 9. Last December, I did a release that had Drupal 9 compatibility, and I had to tag a new version to achieve that.
We launched the COVID site in Rhode Island, on-site factory in Drupal 9 with the Webform module the second week of December. It's a major part of the platform that we've been building.
Yeah, I am seeing amazing things that people are doing. I saw a lot of COVID stuff. It was really interesting because it felt like projects were having this requirement. We need to get data. We need to collect it. We need to distribute funds, and we need it fast. And
we can't store it, right?
Oh yeah, government integration.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was a big part of our decision process with this. We have the site factory instance is in HIPAA compliant infrastructure. We've got the Webform module encrypting all of the fields. And we're using the Webform encrypt. And then we've kind of locking down what people can do with notifications, because this is a platform that all the agencies are going to be using, and they're going to be using it to build forms. So we need to make sure that they're handling that content properly, because we won't always know what forms they're building. And that's really that's why we wanted this. We need to give them something so that they don't go off and use SurveyMonkey or Wufoo or whatever, or Google Web Forms to collect, all of a sudden discover that they're collecting social security numbers. But, by being able to set this up so that there is a role that has web form access, and they're the only people that see the decrypted content. And, so having that flexibility has been key to providing a massive piece of functionality for the state.
That's great to hear.
So shifting from specifically talking about web forms, and of course we'll weave web forms back in where it makes the most sense. Can you explain to me what is sustainability, and specifically how is it going to guide our conversation today? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about Open Collective as well.
Well, there's a history here, and if you go back to the podcast, which people don't have to listen to, it's I'm a consultant, and I decided to make this contribution to the Drupal community, and I did it on the side to help my career, my client, and that is a gain that any individual who contributes open source gets. At the same time, it's a huge amount of effort, and what we see when people contribute to open source, there's a challenge of how do I keep up this effort? How do I get more people to help with this effort? And that all leads to sustainability. How do we sustain our community, our contribution, our products? And it's been a theme in my blog. I've talked about it. I've said at one point or another, I said, what I'm doing right now is not sustainable. I can't be contributing 10 to 15 hours a week and not being paid for it. I'm very privileged to be able to even have that time right now in my career and life to do it. And I'm giving a definition of sustainability. And Open Collective is a tool for that. And we can kind of move on.
I guess one question is, you mentioned some sustainability is like, how do you make it so that you can personally work on stuff more, and how do you get more people involved? Do you find one is harder than the other? For example, getting somebody to contribute to Open Collective versus getting new contributors to contribute to Webform.
Ooh, that is a great question that I am just starting to be able to come up with an answer, because I see now that I'm pushing Open Collective, and we'll get to there, but as I'm pushing more, I'm getting more contribution where it's easier for someone to say, listen, I can give $5 a month because I value what you do, versus I can figure out what you're doing and contribute an hour. And frankly, an hour of someone's time is worth way more than $5 a month. So, contributing is hard. It requires a lot of effort. And if you're not doing it for your work and you're doing it on your own time, it's a privilege for people to find that time. With that said, there are people doing amazing contributions. Some organizations are really have stepped up in the last year. One company, CIT, I think, and it's a shame I don't have it. We'll plug them in the end. And I'm pointing them out on the project page a little bit more, where they have a developer helping me review patches and make an effort. I will say with sustainability, there's some people have said it. It's like with most projects, 1% of the people contribute something back. In our Drupal community, we might have 1 million developers. And frankly, our community is successful because 1% is a huge number out of 1 million. But still, that's just the reality that we have with our code and our organizations too. The number that are members of the DA are very low. It's a few thousand when we have millions of people using Drupal.
Yeah, so we've mentioned Open Collective a couple of times. Can you just give us maybe the elevator pitch on that now? What is Open Collective, and maybe how you came to find it?
Yeah, Open Collective is a tool to allow people to build transparent communities online. And I'm staying away from the word open source because it was really meant to just be a tool to build, communities online that could collect funds to sustain those communities. So it might even be a group of people working together in a meetup. It could be, I think Girls Who Code have a huge collective on there where they're collecting their funds. That's not open source. It's just a group of people working together. Had a lot of traction in the open source community because it provides a transparent way to collect funds to help sustain open source projects. And there's some big projects that are leveraging Open Collective, and they almost set the standard. Like Babel is one, Webpack. Those are two, tools that are used to build React apps. They're huge. They're major parts of infrastructures of large organizations. Like I think Airbnb stands out on both those collectives. Airbnb is backing them with a lot of money. So it's a way for the people who are doing the work to collect funds and use the funds to compensate them. And sometimes it's not even compensate them. It's to pay for costs, hosting costs, event costs. In my case, I used it for a logo at one point when I started Open Collective. And I set it up a few years ago, and I struggled with it. One challenge is you're collecting funds, and people did start giving me funds, and I had enough to, pay for a logo, but compensating yourself, frankly, the amount of funds that were collected were not enough to really compensate my effort. So it became this interesting struggle for me. Is like, there's a misnomer in open source and these funding systems where, I don't know, sometimes people give $5 and assume that solves everything. I hate to say it like that. But, the fact that there's $1,000 in the Webform modules Open Collective doesn't even get close to the amount of effort that's being put into it. And that created an internal struggle for me for about a year where I was like, I don't know what to do with it. And my work situation changed where my efforts were not going to be sustainable. I was not going to be able to do 10 or 15 hours a week to keep the Webform module going. And I made a decision to put a major push on Open Collective to say to the community, like, I need help. I need to be compensated for my time that I'm contributing. And it helps because if you give money to the Open Collective, it allows me to be like, yeah, I can respond to an issue in 24 hours. And that's what I've been working on since the beginning of the year. I've been blogging about and talking about like growing the Open Collective.
And Open Collective, to be clear, Open Collective doesn't have rules in place as to how you can use that money, right? It's based on it's basically just a method for collection. You're defining how that money is spent, and I'm assuming that you are turning back to the community around your initiative to basically dictate how that money gets spent. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I think it's good to bring up a comparison to Patreon, which I think you guys use to encourage people to help back Talking Drupal. And they're very similar. They're similar products. They're meant to help people who are doing good work collect funds. One difference I would call between Patreon and Open Collective is the level of transparency that Open Collective is after, where you can see how much money is donated. Everything's transparent. That's the goal there. I can even get into every invoice you can see. there is one I'm struggling with is, and this is an interesting thing I'm writing about more and more, is you can see the invoice that someone withdrew money in Open Collective, and a criticism that I'm going to start talking to them about is you can't actually see the transactions, like the hours. So I'm billing hours to Open Collective and I attach an invoice, and there's no flag for me to say, here's the invoice of exactly what I'm doing. But this is all in the goal of Open Collective. I personally, complete transparency to me is the secret sauce here, is one of the most important things, because if you're going to give money to something, you want to see value. You want to see something happening. And there's been some struggles in Open Collective where people are taking money and you can't tell. And people are like, well, why did that person withdraw $10,000? At the same time, there's still no one's really being fully compensated for their work. It's very few people in open source can say that. I think the maintainer of Vue, JS, has succeeded in that. And he's talked about it. And he's boy, is there a term like unicorn in open source? CodeMirror, the maintainer of that, was on Tag One's talk and talking about he's managed to make his work sustainable through partnerships, but he's really 100% doing open source work. And I'm not there yet, but it's amazing that since January, the collective has reached $10,000, which is a real tangible number. I mean, that covers a few hours a week of me maintaining it, looking at issues. I mean, frankly, it covers, if there's a security issue, it's covered. I mean, that's one of the, we're at that point where that could be guaranteed.
Interesting.
That's
I'd encourage, I was going to say, I'd encourage people to go look at the Open Collective page. You can look right at the budget. You can see the transactions, the money that's come in and the money that's gone out. It's all right there.
I mean, that's a side of it that I had never really thought about that much. I mean, I have a newsletter about web typography with, some backers on Patreon. Although I advise them to give up on that because it's been a few months since I've written a newsletter. But in any event, I mean, I love the idea of the funds accumulating and then you basically invoicing against it. Like that really does seem like a great way to show people how this all works. So, if you, spend a day a week on this and you invoice for that day and people can see it. And I know that there's maybe some work to do on Open Collective to make that possible, but that seems like a really concrete way to tie these things together when, especially you can imagine being able to tie that back to an issue.
Yeah.
Somebody creates an issue, you do work on that issue, you invoice for it, and people can see oh, I had this problem. So, I'm using this for the state of Rhode Island. We need to be able to do thing X and there's an issue about it and it gets fixed. And now I could really easily go back to people at the state, people at the other companies that I'm working with on this and say, look, this is the concrete cause and effect here. It's really worth it for us to invest here because you can see exactly what's going on. And, I wanted to tie it back to that module specifically because it's such a central thing to what people do with Drupal, especially on large site systems like what we do with Rhode Island. And that's important for us to be able to tie all those things together and then come back to okay, so what does it take then for the Webform module to be sustainable? What level does that have to be in order to ensure that the security gets taken care of, that that these issues are continually being addressed?
So I was going to say, you brought up two good points. One, I want to be really clear. That's what I'm after. There's blog posts. I am tracking the issues in the invoice, showing I even put my rate on there. I'm not going to announce my rate on. That's not the point, but it's tracking every single thing. So any organization that gives money and posts an issue, and frankly, the issue queue is showing that there's 40 issues. So if your organization posts an issue, it's going to get resolved. It's going to get triaged. And yeah, I'm going to invoice. By the way, I'm doing 5-minute increments in the spirit of transparency. That is a pain in the neck for anyone tracking hours, but I want to show that level of transparency. And I'm doing it. You can see that. The other part, Jason, just bring up the challenge I am struggling with Open Collective is individuals get it. Individuals get open source. They're constantly contributing. I'd say 60 to 70% of the backers are individuals. How do you get organizations to do this? It's the number one thing around sustainability that we have to solve for. And I I really struggle with it. I'm writing a dedicated blog post about how do we incentivize organizations? I mean, I'm going to add major backers logos to the project page, and we should talk about the Webform module project page too. But like seeing all these opportunities to incentivize people, and you bring up, if you can show tangible results, I think that helps developers bring it back and say you should back the collective.
I have to say too, 40 issues on Webform is mind blowing. I mean,
low.
I sometimes, mind blowingly low. I mean, I see a module that has like, it's on 3 websites and it has like 130 issues, and you go in there, like nobody's responded to a single one ever. And you know, sometimes you're tempted, just like you said, to just copy the code and get it up to speed and provide a patch. But you know, keeping a module as active as Webform is down to like 2 digits of issues is an amazing feat. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's the single hardest task that I did not expect with the Webform module. At the same time, you know, I've learned how to triage issues, close them, redirect people to the like I don't take support requests in the queue. I move them to other channels like Drupal Answers. And one thing you will see, it's great to have this level of transparency. One of the tricks is if someone files a minor bug, I try to investigate and solve it in the same time. Because we all know that happens in our teams where we have to, you know, someone files the bug, someone looks at the bug, someone diagnosed, that can drag it out to an hour versus if you look and fix, you can get it down to 10 minutes.
That's the philosophy.
Yeah, it works. And it's also, it depends on who's doing the work. I'm trying to be very focused on it. So it's a good selling point to the Webform module.
So
I have an open collective question before we move away from it.
Sure.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that since January, the collective's brought in $10,000.
Yeah.
Who's reporting that $10,000 to Uncle Sam?
Open Collective does a good job of that. I think you get, the organizations get an invoice, so they're able to track it. And when on a personal note, when I pull that money, I'm going to get a tax statement. I'm going to get either a 1099 or I always lose track of it.
So who's reporting that as income? Open Collective, it's income to them?
No, they're holding. I'm going to have to report it as income when I pull the money.
But what if you don't pull the money? So if you
sits there, I think it sits, and it does a rollover for non-for-profits. And I'm not that term. I don't know if that's the 100%. But one thing
I was curious about. Yeah.
There is a shout out, and I'm going to bring up the DA, and then I'm going to switch gears to talk a big picture thing. But like, there's a opportunity. So Open Collective is they take transaction fees, and they're the back, like Open Collective, the company has a non-for-profit that is handling the money.
Okay.
And they take 5% or some number, and then the software company, the team that's doing Open Collective takes another percentage. They're called fiscal sponsors. I'm sorry, I forgot the exact term. And there's an opportunity for the DA to become a fiscal sponsor. Frankly, if the DA was a fiscal sponsor of the Webform modules Open Collective, they would automatically get 5% of that $10,000. It's like one of these things they have to sort out gradually over time. It's a tricky. And, frankly, the DA has to vet these things and make decisions about it. And, it's a certain not much responsibility, but they have to do the invoicing. Like if someone said there's a problem and I want my money back, I don't know how that unfolds. I haven't been doing it long enough to see it. Does that answer most of the Open Collective questions?
Does me.
There's a whole nother line of questioning there as to whether the DA should become a fiscal sponsor, but I don't think we have to go down that rabbit hole right now.
But I'm glad we. I don't want to go down there.
I think it does. I wanted to kind of bring this back to one of the questions that you had posed is like, how do we get beyond individuals? And I think that one of the things that I know I've always tried to do when I was at Isovera in working on this platform with the state of Rhode Island is ensure that it's actually sort of baked into contracts and practices that nothing ever stays with the project. Like if we have to do something to address a module, it goes back through D.O. Like it's a patch, it gets contributed back, like whatever it is that we're doing has to go through that process. So you never end up with a fix that only stays in this one place. And I think that's a mindset thing that, like, for those of us who lead teams, need to make that part of our practice. And I think then you extend that out to it. So these things aren't line items, they're just how you work. And the same thing could be said to like how you scope projects. So, as an example, like if I were back, still in an agency and making regular practice of using these modules that have an open collective, there's something I could build into the budget for a project. And so you build it in such a way that it's part of the cost structure of using open source. And so some of those things that companies do that use open source as an agency, it gets, they're making real contributions back in the form of the patches that they're contributing on anything they're doing. But it's a small step to say like, okay, we're going to take 1% or whatever, of project income. And it's like, that is actually going to go back to be dedicated to supporting the modules that make what we do possible. Because I would venture to say that there are very few like large scale websites out there, in the history of using Drupal that have not made use of the Webform module at some point. I mean, it is one of those things that like it's maybe not views central, but it's pretty close to that. Yeah. I mean, I know I've been using a form of the Webform module, one way or another since 2007. And so like that's just it's a part of the fabric of building large scale websites that you need to collect content, you need to collect data, and this is the way to do it. So shame on me for never having done made a financial contribution there. I mean, I know we've contributed patches to lots of things, but still, like that doesn't pay your rent.
Well, let's step back, because I want to point out something important. You brought up getting involved in committing patches, and we've focused on Open Collective, but I want to be clear, when I did this, I really thought it out. And if you go to the project page, there's a triptych with a fourth call out. And there's 3 things that I've kind of concluded that are really important to sustainability. And the first one is get involved. That to me is the number one, period. If people get involved, that fixes the problem. Frankly, I wouldn't have the problem if more people were working on the way. If we had more people at my level committing time and sharing, and we figured that out, it can work. And it does happen in core at an amazing level. We have some really experts working together. So getting people involved, I frankly did there's a triptych. It's like get involved, help fund development, which is Open Collective, figuring out how we can compensate people. And the third part, which it's self-promoting, but it's legit in the community because we all do it. I also put a promotion for just hiring me for professional services. And frankly, what I've been doing, and Jason, I think it is applicable for this county of Rhode Island, is I'm doing consulting on just planning out web form related aspects of a project, literally just 4 hours. And it's been really successful with a few organizations where we just schedule 2 calls and we go over, what do you need to do? What are you struggling with? Here's some suggestions. Don't do this, don't do that. And frankly, all of these things together, I think, help make our community sustainable. And I will say the fourth one is people should join the DA. It's like the DA needs that to help to support infrastructure and maybe even become the fiscal sponsor of these, collectives that might hopefully happen. By the way, the Gin theme has an Open Collective, and they're using GitHub pages, and I frankly was blown away. They're equally successful. The maintainers getting enough money and that's an admin theme for Drupal 9.
So how do you think they've had such success in their short run?
Bigger organizations, I think Open Social, to give them a shout, I think gave them a sizable chunk to help support them. And I think that admin theme, one thing is it's an aesthetic tool. So certain things like Open Social needs that visual. I haven't spoken to the maintainer to know, I think he's at $10,000 with his goal of $20,000 annually. And by the way, I want to, now that I threw some numbers out there, I see some goals for maintainership and sustainability. Like in the $10, $20, $30,000 range, it's like they gradually increase the ability to sustain and maintain a module and even grow it. Like for me, if there was $30,000 a year, I could add features. And then frankly, if we look back at rules getting to Drupal, being completely upgraded to Drupal 8, you start getting into, you need close to $100,000. And keep in mind, that's not like one person gets it, it's spread out. Yeah. But we need, by the way, I like throwing numbers out there because sometimes we're afraid to say them. Yeah. Because you're like, oh, everyone's supposed to do this for free. And I don't think so. I think people should be compensated.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Can I add one thing about compensation? Because I get pushback sometimes. There's a huge difference in open source between compensation and monetization. Compensation is being paid for your time. Monetization is you're seeking a profit, looking to build a profit, and you're a business, and that's the driver of your contribution. And I guess I need to vent that because sometimes people are like, I'm trying to monetize the Webform module, and that's simply never going to happen. I'm never going to be compensated for the work at the level I did it. That's fine. It's sustainability. It's just making sure that people who are doing work can be paid for the work they do.
So
yeah, I mean, they scale just to belabor that point a bit. I mean, monetization would be like you pay a monthly fee to be able to use the Webform module. You pay per submission, or you pay, per feature or something. Whereas compensation is just the time that you're spending on it, or some other developer is spending on developing the module or fixing things or dealing with issue queues, is paid at an hourly rate.
There's a culture difference, I think, between Drupal and WordPress that has always existed. And that kind of freemium paid model is really common with plugins in the WordPress world, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty normal to see, like, here's the light version of the module. If you want to get the full version, it'll be $39 or whatever. And that's just normal there. And it's never been normal in the Drupal world. And I don't say that as it's like good or bad, but you have to admit, like, that being normalized in the WordPress world opens the door for a lot of people to actually make a living building their little widgets, similar to what has like Telerik in the .NET world, building controls and little widgets that people use there.
So, we've obviously talked a lot about sustainability and how it applies to web forms. We mentioned, the Gin theme as well. I'm wondering, what changes does the community need to make to achieve sustainability? But more specifically, how do we apply what you've done, or what Gin has done as a model to the wider community, to modules that are maybe a lot smaller than web forms?
I've thought about it. It's a big challenge. I feel fortunate that I'm in this unique space where I can push this one thing forward, and it's kind of very tangible. It's a tool that people have to use. For smaller modules, I think it's got to be much more collaborative. It has to be some sort of like joint fund that's well organized. I mean, transparency and efficiency is going to be important. Like, I guess one challenge is you could have a joint fund, but then who are you paying? How are you paying them? In some ways, we have to, by the way, compensation I want to throw out in the Drupal community is not just money. The commit credit system is compensation. You contribute code, your organization moves up in the ranking on the marketplace. And it might be, we have to figure out some, by the way, I think for money is for individuals, because that's the bottom line. You're trying to pay your bills. You have to figure out how to do that. How you get multiple people.
But for smaller projects, though, it could also be time related, right? So like for a module that's not as widely used as, say, web forms, you could have a company donating time to keep that maintained and keep it going, right? So that's another form of sustainability. I guess the question, and this is actually probably lower down in the questions, but sustainability always doesn't, and you've alluded to this, always doesn't relate to cash, right?
It doesn't, but that's a great point. It's like, it's not related to cash. It's related to how do we keep things moving and working together. And I mean, we have a problem in our community. I'm going to use the word, we're loosey-goosey about maintaining our modules. It goes up, maybe someone works on it. I mean, really, if we were a great community and we were a cooperative and we force people into that cooperative, companies could rotate.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, like, there's a module that needs to be upgraded to Drupal 9. There's a list. We voted on it. We say this is important. And these companies have agreed to donate time to achieve this goal. I mean, it's an incredible... Cooperatives do work. I mean, I live in New York, Brooklyn. We have like one of the biggest cooperatives, food cooperatives in the world. It's incredible.
Yeah.
But people get so nervous when you put that up there. If you say, well, there's a system, and frankly, there's rewards and that you gain, and some people can't gain. Excluding people if they don't contribute is, yeah.
It's a tough question, right? Because in an open source community, you don't want to put a practice in place that is exclusionatory to somebody, right? You don't want a company that's not contributing or not, putting funds into a collaboration to feel different than a company that is, right?
I got in trouble not in trouble. It's like I put a blog post out about putting my foot down on the issue queue, because first off, I want to be really clear, John, when you say that, any new person, I respond to their issue faster than anyone else, because they're a new person in the community. I want them to have a good, positive experience. Mm-hmm. At the same time, at some point, it's pretty hard when someone posts an issue. Can you fix this immediately? They've been on Drupal.org for 12 years. And their profile shows what they've contributed, and they've contributed nothing. Mm-hmm. And I almost want, and I don't do it, but I was really close to being like, I just need to say, I can't help you. I'm sorry. I'm donating my time. People are donating money to help me. And I have backed off from it a little bit, but it is a tricky one. There are people that don't get it. They know.
So, I mean, there are always going to be people out there that are taking advantage of the system, right?
Yeah, pure freeloaders.
Right.
Yes, there are, and I get that. But I would also say, and we, when I say we, I mean, I think like any of us that have been to DrupalCon or any of the code sprints or anything like that, where so people who have like participated in this whole thing, you see it all the time. People don't know the way in, and that it's a perennial problem. And so, using and so not everyone can. Their job may not let them. Not everybody knows how, and not everybody feels confident enough to. So your reaction to a first time poster, like, is, I think like the best possible one. Respond to that quickly so that they kind of get a good introduction of what interacting with the Drupal community is like. And then figuring out like, what is their level? Like what is their ability to contribute? Because sometimes it's just filing the issue, expressing the opinion, raising something. Maybe that may be the only thing they can do. Might be the only thing they're capable of doing.
I agree.
It's hard to know. And I think that it is important for us to keep that in mind when we start to form that opinion. I mean, I've been on the module development side and contributor side, and frankly, much more often been on the consumption side. And I mean, I'll admit that. I mean, I contribute on other things in different ways, but that's, everybody has a position, and I think it's okay. Calling people out, I think, is just too strong a way to put it. But I think
I agree.
Raising the awareness, I think, is legit, and giving somebody the chance to respond.
So I've switched gears. One thing I do a lot of is nudging. And we're talking about in the community, there's a talk, nudging meaning like at the end of an issue that I've paid, that's been paid for by Open Collective, I post a little nudge that says, hey, this was paid for by the Open Collective. Get it? And frankly, the message is always not join Open Collective and compensate me. It's get involved, help fund development, and frankly, hire professional support so that it's a broad message. I always say welcome, but then it's hard. I just struggle with there's agencies. You see people that work for those agencies that they're leeches. I'm sorry. And by the way, none of them are Drupal agencies. These are like the giant massive agencies that sit there leeching from open source on such a level that, and frankly, if we could change that, it would change all of open source. When you're talking $1 billion agency that contributes nothing, it could change everything. So I don't think we want to give up. Like it's like we don't want to give up. We don't want to discourage. It's like this very fine line. We don't want to give up on.
Do you find that the new, one question that we talked a little bit about this last time we were on, but do you find that the new merge workflow and GitLab integration is helping with people post their own changes, or has contribution stayed the same? Has it dropped off? Are people using patches still?
I can't give you a concrete answer because I struggle with the new workflow because it has some, I still use patches and branches locally because it's faster. I'm used to it. So I can't give you a concrete answer. I can't tell you one way or another where more issues are coming in with the new Git workflow versus patches.
Okay.
One thing I'm struggling with, and it's an interesting Git challenge, is I'm maintaining 2 versions of Webform. It's like the 5x branch, the 8.5x branch, the 8.x-5x and 6x at the same time. So it's hard to manage that Git flow because you really need the patch that goes to both versions. So yeah, sorry, I can't give you a good answer. I'm glad we're doing it because it's called modernization. And frankly, if I'm a little behind, that's okay. I will catch up. We are all going to catch up at some point.
When we think about sustainability, or when I think about it, I'm also thinking about the longevity of the project. And right now, I mean, Webform module is Jacob, right? Not to go to the, hit by the bus thing or anything like that, but as part of the collective and part of your long-term strategy, have you planned out an exit or a way to have the module be maintained and sustained with less of you over time?
I see it as a possibility, especially if there are funds there and there are other people co-maintaining. One of the people who's helping maintain a lot of issues, he's working for a company that's doing this to earn credit in the community, which is just as valuable for them. I see opportunities to get people more involved. It's a struggle. Like we have not reached that point where like co-maintaining is a tricky one in the community. There are certain modules that have been very successful, but it always requires someone to contribute 95%. There's no, off the top of your head, do you know of any module you're like, yeah, I know 50-50 2 maintainers that are doing that work, and it sits right there between the 2 of them, or any split like that? Open source has just unfolded that way. I think in core, frankly, you know what? I want to stand correct on that statement. I think in core it happens because core has, people committed, experience, they build up.
But I think a lot of that too is people get their own general domain. Like somebody maintains a core module, they maintain the node module, they maintain layout builder, they maintain something, and of course they contribute back and forth across stuff. So. But people are maintaining systems, I think, more.
They are, but I've seen some of the initiatives where the collaboration felt very reasonable. Like when I saw Claro happening, some people were doing more work, but it was a huge joint effort where everyone was just moving that. It's an admin theme, just for people who don't know, and they were not one person was doing it. It's just core doesn't really work that way anymore, which is great. In Contrib, I don't have a module that comes to the top of my head where I'm not going to think of one person or company leading it.
I think there's a couple of things that I want to highlight that I think are really important that have come up here. And one is we've got to get over hesitating about asking for contribution. And I mean money. That's because, again, when we've all worked for agencies or organizations that have benefited greatly from open source, and I've asked this to a number of people lately, how often are you hearing resistance to using open source? And that has largely gone away. And that's something, any of us that have been involved in Drupal or open source for any amount of time, if you go back 5 to 10 years, you had to do a lot of justifying just to get open source in the door, to get IT leadership to be okay with it. We need to take that next step. and say, okay, yeah, we want to use it because it's going to cut our development time in half or by 90% in some cases to get this project done, we need to commit some funds. Like that, like we need to start to change that mindset and say, like, open source is open source. It doesn't come without a cost. And that there has to be a commitment back. It can't just be teams committing patches, but there actually has to be some real money committed back to it, whether it's to the DA or, to module maintainers. Like that's got to be normalized just as much as using open source in the first place is. Mm-hmm. And then I think personally, I think a lot of us have that conflict of like, well, I'm doing this stuff because, and I don't want to ask for money because I feel weird about that, or like whatever the hang up is, or you don't want someone to exert undue control over what it is that you're working on. I mean, like those are all things that we have to come to terms with, but we also need to get over it, because if we don't, then it's just burnout. So you can't just like keep slaving away at these things and not have a way that's okay to ask for help and think it's justified.
Well, thank you for joining us, Jacob. If our listeners have any questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can join the Talking Drupal channel on the Drupal Slack, and you can email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can always get show updates by signing up for a newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo. That's CAMP promo.
And thank you to our patrons. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron by going to talkingdrupal.com and pushing that to become a patron button. Well, Jacob, thank you for joining us. Is there anything that we missed that you would like to touch on before we leave?
I think we did a great job. I mean, Jason, when you ended, it's like we need a community effort on this. It's like really, I mean, one funny thing when you were saying it was just reminding me, even in the issue queue as being a maintainer, we have to support each other, because at some point, like in my experience, I have someone come in, they're a little toxic, or there's some issue, and that's hard. It happens. And frankly, what helped is some people stepped in, maybe, Neil Drum would be something like from the DA that just was like, oh, we can shut down this ticket. We don't need to have this discussion anymore. Let's move on. But it's just an example. We have to figure out how to help each other and collaborate. The organization one is a huge challenge. I can't emphasize that one. I need just people to give feedback on that. Ongoing.
Yeah. It certainly was a good conversation today. So, Jacob, if someone wanted to reach out to you to continue this conversation in any way, how would they do that?
jrockowitz.com is, right there. I mean, they should all go to the Webform module project page, because everything's there centralized, including contact me, and, the discussions on my blog are a great way to help. Contributing your thoughts there make a huge difference.
Great. John, how can people reach you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, including Drupal.org. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
Great. How about you, Jason?
You can find me at J Pomentel on basically any social network you can think of. You can follow the dogs on Instagram. That's the more important part. And if you want to find out more about web typography and variable fonts, you can go to rwt.io.
And how about you, Nick?
You can find out about me at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And I'm Stephen Cross at stephencross.com with a PH.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.